this system is being influenced a lot, which is right and fine in the way things are, by the companies that make the most money, right? The companies that make the most money have the best shot at success, have the best shot of adoption and growth the quickest. And so we need to create additional courses, like Project Found Ed aims to do, to help add more information into the ecosystem, to help everybody make better choices, so that it's not the companies that make the most money that are the most successful, but that the most impactful companies in education technology are the ones that make the most money.
I am one of your co-hosts today, Omid Fatuhi. I'm the Director of Learning Innovations at WG Labs, and one of the founders of the Learning Labs speaker series, where we like to think that we're able to engage in a learning experience that is free of boundaries, of rules, of roles, of status, where we can all engage in understanding the origins and the developments of ideas as they've been developed over a lifespan of an individual's work. And through this Learning Lab series, we have the incredible privilege of inviting individuals who really have been at the frontier, at the forefront of leading a great deal of thoughts and leadership in the domains of relevance to EdTech and education more broadly. Today is no exception, and it really is going to be a very engaging conversation as we learn about EdTech as its own space, as its own landscape, and how it's evolved and responded to COVID. So again, I just want to welcome you to Learning Labs. If this is your first time, really an engaging experience, and we encourage you to reach out to us during and after this conversation if you want to be put on our mailing list. We do host these on a regular basis, and we'd love to have you be engaged in this ongoing series. So just to give you an overview of today's format, we do have an hour. That's often too short to be able to really do justice to the topics that we're focused on. But hopefully it's enough to give you a good taste of the content and be able to engage. And really, we do create the space to allow you to engage as much as possible. So what we'll do is we'll spend a few minutes introducing the series, which I've just done. I'll hand it off to my colleague, Nicole Barbero, who will be giving you an introduction to our speaker today. And then we'll pass it off to our presenter, Sandro Olivieri, today to give us an overview of the EdTech landscape, what we've seen in the past few years, and most particularly the past year. And then we'll do a deeper dive with a series of questions that my team will have for the presenter, after which we'll open it up to any questions that you may have. Throughout this entire conversation, we really encourage you to engage and interact. If you have questions, comments, please post them in the chat. I'd like to remind you that in order for your chat questions to be seen by everybody, that there is a drop-down option where you can click that your questions and comments be visible to all audience members and not just the panelists. So if you can just do that drop-down option right now, that will give you the chance to post your questions to the entire group. And then we'll close it up really quickly with a few minutes, saying thanks to our presenter and seeing if there's any lingering questions or comments from there. But without further ado, please allow me to hand it off to my colleague, Dr. Nicole Barbero, who will be doing an introduction. But before I do that, some of you might be wondering, why am I speaking in a bit of a muffled tone? Unfortunately, I broke my jaw last week, but there was no way that I would miss this conversation, so I needed to be here. Please indulge me as I try to speak my way through with a wired jaw, but nonetheless, it shouldn't take anything away from the focus and our presenter today. With that, I'll hand it off to Nicole to present our speaker today.
Thanks, Omid, and really we all commend you for being able to participate in this conversation so elegantly while you are in the state that you are. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Sandro, for being here as well. I just want to take a few minutes to formally introduce Sandro Olivieri to see, kind of what the work he's been doing. He is designed for the AT&T Aspire EdTech Accelerator. And in that time, he has also developed a consulting practice around what he's learned through that role. He's done projects with national funders in areas like supporting startup ecosystems that lead to impactful outcomes in education, designing innovative acceleration programs to accelerate impact, and creating pipelines to better support diverse entrepreneurs in education and many other things as well. Recently, he's founded a nonprofit organization called Project Found Ed, which is going to be kind of a key background piece to our conversation today, as you can see from his background as well. And Project Founded, which he'll tell us more about, generally aims to band together EdTech founders and highlight the opportunities and pitfalls in starting up new EdTech companies. Before he has, found this specific role with this new nonprofit, he has also been a computer scientist, an MBA, a restaurant manager, and a comic strip artist, which I find really interesting. In his current incarnation, he is a strategy consultant who dedicates his career to helping large organizations innovate by leveraging the startup ecosystem. He's worked in various areas of technology, including wearable devices, connected car developer services, connected health, IoT, education, and big data. So he has a lot of experience in the technology space. Currently, he lives in Berkeley, California with his wife and 3 daughters, and he serves on the board for 826 National, which is a nonprofit dedicated to improving writing education through a network of youth writing and publishing centers, as well as digital offerings. So with that wonderful broad background, I'm really excited to introduce Sandro Olivieri today. Thank you for joining us, and I'll turn the floor over to you to give everyone an introduction of all the wonderful things you've been up to.
Thanks. Really appreciate the invite. Excited to be here. And I'm kind of shortening my bio. It's strange to sit here and hear somebody else talk about this. It feels weird. But it's all true. It's all stuff I've done. But I'm going to focus today on everything we've been doing on Project Found Ed. And to do that, I'll go back a little bit into how this all started. I've been working exclusively in the EdTech space for the last 7 years. And mostly in entrepreneurial support. And I do that because I've always been passionate about the role that technology will play in bringing about more equitable learning outcomes for all learners. And supporting other people, creating these technology solutions just seemed like a way to scale that passion, right? And so we've been working with lots of entrepreneurs over the last 7 years, and we've noticed a few things that we can't let go without fixing, right? And we were starting to realize a lot of the difficulties if, there are entrepreneurs in the audience that, things that we have come to know and feel in our gut, right? Like how difficult it is to just sell into educational institutions with long sales cycles, different budget line items you have to deal with, who to target at an institution. It differs from state to state, from university to university, from school to school. There's lots of things that are hard about it. It makes EdTech slow generally. To fundraising, right? How difficult it is to fundraise generally. There's not a ton of EdTech specific funders out there. And so there's all of these things that just kind of add up to how difficult it is to build an EdTech company from the get-go. And that, I feel like that's always been true. Now, when you start at the beginning of last year, when we started seeing school closures happening due to COVID-19, we felt that that stuff that lived in our gut, that stuff that we knew was already difficult about creating and running EdTech companies. We felt in our gut that as soon as schools started to close, this was going to be a little bit of a crucible for EdTech, right? There's going to be some people that were going to do really well, and then there were going to be a lot of people that just were not. And so we wanted to sort of head out there and see, okay, well, how can we predict or get more information about what we think is going to happen? And we found that nobody knew, just nobody knew, right? Philanthropy had paused putting money out there. Funders had paused putting new checks out there, especially because they were looking to shore up their existing portfolios, which is a good and fine thing to do. And schools were really worried about their upcoming budgets and not really sure where they were needing to spend. There's a lot of emergency spending at the time on very specific things, but that notwithstanding, we didn't know if there was going to be an increase in EdTech spending, decrease. There was no money anywhere. And so we thought, okay, well, let's go figure it out. We sent out a survey to all of the EdTech founders we knew. We got responses from just a bit over 100. And we wrote up what we found. And it was dire, right? Heading into the summer, this was April 2020. heading into the summer, most of our respondents, over 70%, had 6 months of runway or less heading into the summer of 2020. Many of those people had needed to, or felt pressured to, or felt compelled to offer discounts on their products to sort of help education generally sort of make this pivot from live instruction to online instruction. So they offered discounts, often 100%, for various amounts of time. Some of them saw a huge increase in demand, right? Those that were ready for distance learning saw huge increases in demand on their discounted products, right? And those huge increases in demand always come with associated costs, right? You're hiring these customer support staff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we had a huge cash crunch, limited runways, no money was being spent, and nobody knew it. And that's what got me, right? Why did nobody know? Why weren't we talking about this more? And I started to realize that there is no organization out there that is tasked with, or takes it upon itself to understand what the ecosystem looks like and how we can force it or influence it to stay on track, right? And so we took the work that we did on that survey and we turned it into a company, that nonprofit called FoundEd. And what we hope to do is essentially be a mirror to this industry and say, hey, this is how we're doing. Us, entrepreneurs, students, educators, institutions, and funders, this is how we're doing. And I'm not going to go out there and tell funders you're investing in the wrong things, or I'm not going to tell schools you're spending on the wrong things, but I am going to hold a mirror up and say, hey, this is what's going on, and this is just more information for you. And hopefully we can help bend the direction of this industry to focus more on equitable learning outcomes and not necessarily, the things that, are driving it now, which heretofore we haven't seen anyone sort of define or talk about really. So that's a long-winded way of saying what we're into these days.
I really love the kind of mission and motivation behind Project Founded. I think it's really important for this, community of founders to understand, what's going on in the industry and what's going on with other founders and learn from them. So I think the community-driven approach and, kind of being a mirror to that industry is really important. So I know you were founded kind of out of this need at the, influx of the COVID pandemic and that kind of major transition across K12 and higher ed. Where do you see Project Founded going, in this next school year? So it's, great time. Everyone's starting classes either last week or in the next couple of weeks. Where do you see Project Founded fitting in as we kind of move into this next very weird hybrid, everyone's not quite sure what we're doing yet, year as we move forward?
That's a really good question, and I don't have a great answer yet. Right, we're still in huge learning mode. Right, we took all the work that we did with that initial survey, and we've decided to focus on this community of EdTech founders, as you point out, because we feel like EdTech founders, at the very least, have seen all of the difficulties in education. Right, we know how difficult it is to implement. We know how difficult it is to sell, how difficult it is to fundraise, how difficult it is to prove efficacy, how long things of this nature take. Where are the failure points? Entrepreneurs really see a lot of the things that need fixing in this industry. And so we've decided we're banding all of these folks together in a community to try and at least surface these problems so we can start talking about them more openly and getting folks with, deeper pockets and larger platforms to start convening around solutions. And so right now, the community launched about three months ago. And we're over 400 EdTech companies in the community already and growing. And so we are focused on that growth right now to make sure that our platform is big enough that we can create a countervailing force to the forces that are driving EdTech right now. And the forces that are driving EdTech right now are, from our perspective, from what we're hearing, is just a huge, need and desire to go back to normal. There is some shift for sure that is happening now in a lot of institutions and a lot of K-12 schools that are shifting to a little bit more blended classroom kind of models, a little bit more distance learning, but not a ton, honestly. And so there's a huge reversion to the mean happening. Administrators really wanted to get back to something that looks like normal to them. But I also feel like that won't last. There will be a bounce there, right? Because so many folks are anxious for alternative educational models, mostly online. Lots of folks leaving public education classrooms generally, and will demand more distance learning. And there's all sorts of fallout from that too, which we can talk about.
Yeah, I'm curious with kind of that new somewhat shift going on to more of these kind of alternative education models that are really based online, and that shift to a more blended learning format, which presents a whole host of challenges for learning and teaching alike. Have you seen any new types of companies kind of come up in the last year that are focused explicitly on that blended and hybrid learning that are joined your community?
Yeah, absolutely. And the truth is they've always been there, right? In so many ways, people have been making bets in where education will go for years, right? And investors are happy to tell you about all of the bets they've made over the past few years, waiting for this time. And in fact, a lot of the conversation right now is about the EdTech boom, right? This is our time. It's finally come. We can prove all of the things that we've been betting on. This is it. Let's go. Everybody go all in on EdTech. And that's a good thing generally. And there are some hidden costs to that kind of boom, right? The kinds of EdTech companies that are being invested in or doubled down on or adopted generally are direct-to-consumer models. So B2C, they're going directly, cutting institutions out altogether and going direct-to-consumer. Now that is a step forward in terms of using technology to deliver learning outcomes to more people. From our perspective, generally though, it's fundamentally inequitable, right? If you are then cutting institutions out that might be able to subsidize the cost or negate the cost altogether for learners, then only those that can afford those kinds of offerings will be able to use them. And so there's a fundamental that's the fundamental inequitable nature of direct to consumer that we worry about. We don't want necessarily to say that these companies are not great. They are. They're providing more learning to more people all over the place. But we need to make sure that we sound the alarm on the fact that everything that's getting funded, everything that's getting picked up, everything that's getting everything they need to succeed are these direct to consumer models, and that can't be. That can't be the whole story.
Yeah, I'm a little bit blown away, to be honest, by what you've just shared. I recognize the incentive structures for EdTech companies to go where the demand is, and if it's B2C, then that's where they're going to go. I'll be honest, I hadn't thought about the consequences on equity. And I'm trying to process this as you're speaking, and I'm wondering what has been and what can be the roles of institutions as being the brokers, the honest brokers of equitable access to essential EdTech tools. And what can we do to ensure that that is sustained, even as EdTech companies are trying to survive and recognizing that the demand is coming increasingly from the clients, the students themselves. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, lots of thoughts, and I don't think I have any answers, right? We contend with so many things in that scenario, right? Often what's holding institutions back from adopting new models can be legacy culture, systems, procurement processes, whatever you want to call it. Institutions generally need to get a lot better at that. And there's a lot of things holding them back from doing so, right? It's their big bureaucracies is one reason. Another reason is that EdTech relatively is very new to these institutions, in K12 and Higher Ed both. Higher Ed less so, but it's very new from a perspective that most of the educators we talk to or administrators that we talk to still view technology as mostly a monolith, right? They think to themselves, okay, we've got this problem. Is this somewhere where we, should use EdTech, or should we not and go do something else? And that is a problem, because forevermore, right? The decisions you make to solve your problems in your institution will have some level of technology. And so we need to be a lot more nuanced in our thinking about how we apply technology to solve the problems in education. And right now it's either an either or for a lot of purchasing decisions. And so there are solutions for just about everything. There's a lot of EdTech companies out there. They're being created all the time. And they have a tough time selling into institutions. So I think one of the problems, or one of the problems that will need to be fixed once we get this, when we eventually get this solved, is procurement. Generally, is one of the main things that holds everything back, because that has downstream effects to just about everything, like investment, the kinds of outcomes that you have for students, just everything. Once we solve procurement processes, then I think that's off the risks.
So yes, so I really like your interesting point of like a lot of EdTech companies now are going directly to the consumers, that are in the classroom with faculty specifically. So I'm curious because, there's a lot of EdTech out there that not all EdTech is necessarily focused on in the classroom for like learning. Specifically, some of it is more kind of say in the higher ed university campus or more community-based EdTech. But for the EdTech that is focused, in on the classroom, what are those challenges that founders are facing to sell to institutions when the tech is intended to be used by faculty in their classroom? So I can see kind of some potential misalignment of, how EdTech founders can get that tech in front of faculty if they have to go through university administrators.
You've named the number one thing that distinguishes EdTech from every other tech industry, which is that our users are almost never our buyers, almost never. So all of that startup 101 stuff that's out there, you can just throw that away. It just doesn't apply to EdTech. It's totally different. Sales is different. Pricing is different. Marketing is different. Customer support is different. It's all different because your users who you need to focus on, who you should focus on, right? If your user is an educator, you should focus on everything that makes their experience better. But that doesn't necessarily lead to a sale, which is just crazy making, right? And so it's true across institution and it's true worldwide, right? This is not something that that is solved just about anywhere, unless you are a parent who is the de facto educator for a kid at home and you're buying these direct to consumer products, right? And so that's what's being circumvented, right? When we're not solve this problem within institutions, we drive more people to the direct to consumer route. And so for those that are getting going, the number one advice we give everybody is, fundraising is hard. And so you need to do it, but you should not be focused on it. You should be focused on building revenue. And to build revenue, you got to get those administrators, those people in purchasing positions. And the best way to do that is to turn your users, your educators generally, or your students directly into evangelists for your own product. Build community around the folks that would be interested in using products like yours, and give them all the tools necessary to get onboarded for free in some way, either through a trial or through some free to use option. We tend to prefer long free trials, enough time so that educators can really build it into their day-to-day and really miss it when it's gone. And then give them everything. Like if you can do pre-filled W-9s, do it. If you can pre-write an email for them to send to their administrator to advocate for purchasing the product, do that. Everything you can to make it easy for those users to turn into evangelists for your product and make that purchase, do that. But going directly to administrators with emails and phone calls, another thing we all need to do that doesn't work very well. So, these are the problems that need fixing.
So your idea is really building up that community at the faculty or the user level to help influence the decisions of, the institutions and administrators that are buying, large site, packages for these products.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've seen some data and some research around this, at least in K-12. This School's Venture Fund, along with Gallup, did some research last year on the lines of, defining who is the most influential voice in the purchasing process. And even though educators are never really the direct purchasers, they're the loudest voice. They're the most influential. And converting that voice into one that can lead to a sale is the most important thing an EdTech company can do as they're going through the sales process.
Do you, in your work or in the companies that you work with, have you seen a model in which there is a better and more effective channel to the voices of the consumers, so that you are able to articulate that when you are going to the decision makers? One of the things that we try to do with the College Innovation Network at Labs, where we work with institutions, is give institutions a better understanding of what their students' needs are, because it turns out many institutions don't already know that, nor do they know how to sort of stay on top of the emerging and evolving needs of the students. In the same vein, I wonder if there is a mechanism of better understanding students' experiences with those EdTech products that could be of value to administrators, but it's just not leveraged effectively enough. And I wonder if you've seen an effective model of that in your work.
Not necessarily an effective model like one that any EdTech company can build, but I am heartened by some of the things we've seen around community-based learning. So some companies that come to top of mind are folks like Fiveable, who started in the AP space, just providing AP resources to students. And one of the things that I think is interesting about them is that when they deliver their learnings to the students, they build communities around the content. So it's communities of both students and teachers. And so they're all in there interacting together and sort of helping each other out. People that they don't know are super willing to help each other out as they all study for the same AP test together, right? And so now they're taking that model that they proved out in AP and applying it to all school, all subjects, right? And so that sort of approach puts teachers and students in the same community, and they essentially is an easy way for teachers to have direct insight into what students are talking about, students helping each other, and students helping teachers, teachers helping students as well. Again, I don't know if that's something that we can replicate for everyone everywhere, but I think that kind of model of building, leveraging technology to build communities around specific subjects, I think is a very interesting one to follow. The other thing I will say about that too is that their customer is not an administrator, their customer is not a teacher, they're direct to the student, right? And they're mostly K through 12 students, juniors and seniors in high school, and they have a direct relationship with that client. They don't really have their parents' email addresses, right? They have that student's address. So EdTech companies are starting to target students directly. Why? Because it's a fool's errand to try and target educators, right? They're having much more success targeting students directly and giving them exactly what they want because the students are telling them what they want.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting. I'm reading this book by Daniel Kahneman right now called Noise, and it talks about the errors in judgment. And he categorizes them as two basic domains of error. One is bias, and the other is just a random noise. And the analogy that he uses in the book is like, if you were to imagine an individual who's either shooting a gun, or a group of individuals who are shooting a gun or an arrow, bias is going to demonstrate itself by how off the mark the range of hits are, which has nothing to do with how spread that data is, and that's noise. And these two sources of error are both important. And it strikes me that what we're going through now with the pandemic is more that random error, that noise that increased the spread of demand, of user feedback. And so it makes sense that these companies are going to the domains where they have more direct access to student feedback on the effectiveness. And again, I wonder if there's a way of leveraging those insights that can be taken to the administrators, because if I'm understanding correctly, administrators are a little bit more tentative. They're a little bit more slow in the procurement because they don't have full confidence about what students' needs are or how they resonate with the existing tools that are out there. Perhaps if there's a way of getting them more direct access to that, that might be one way of helping them make more confident decisions. But I don't know. And again, I'm sort of pressing the same question here of, is there a way of injecting more confidence in this current climate where we have more uncertainty? And if you've seen anything to that effect.
Injecting more confidence into it. I'm not sure, because you're pointing out something that is very valid and true, and it is happening, right? That administrators can't really see what the student needs might be in order to make more responsible decisions. But the truth of the matter is that because of the point we made earlier about how administrators generally, there's always exceptions, view technology as sort of a monolith. A lot of the decisions that are being made are being based on what other people are doing. And so, and falls really far down on the list of things that they worry about in doing business, right? In many respects, they are, if you're let's say you're a K12 administrator, I run a building full of staff and students and support staff that has this needs, and on a day-to-day basis, I got to worry about all these things. Pretty far down the list is what EdTech am I going to use in middle school math, right? And so we got to remember all of that, when we as EdTech founders and entrepreneurs think to ourselves, why aren't any of my cold emails working? It's like, well, if you've ever seen the inbox of an administrator, you know why, right? If you email them today, in the next hour, it'll be on page 2 of their inbox, right? And they don't open any of them. And so we really got to remember the realities on the ground when we're doing this stuff. So what we hope to do with Project Found Ed is less about like, what are the tactical things you can do today to sell today, and sort of build our voice big enough so that we can start tackling the problems of like, well, let's bring this up in priority on administrators. Let's make it easier for administrators to move this up in priority levels and make it easier for them to sort of figure out what's out there so that they can solve it. Because right now they're saying, shoot, here's my scores or here's my attainment on this particular subject. I need to do something tomorrow to fix that. What did the school next door do? What did the district next door do? What did the institution over here with my buddy Bob, like, what did they do? And I'm just going to go do that, right? That's what decisions are often boiled down to. Not always, but often are boiled down to. And that's a problem.
You've mentioned some differences or, kind of in this process of, administrators not reading emails and just like, doing more of this ground up kind of influence on administrators, really word of mouth and community building to help get these products in the door at the institutional level. Are these kind of differences or are these approaches things that you see are similar across K12 and higher ed, or are there differences in those markets? Because I know the K12 market and EdTech is probably the majority of the EdTech market. It's a huge space. So, I'm curious because we have a lot of higher ed individuals in our audiences, but, at WGU, we have an exceptional teachers college that works in the K12 space. So I'm curious if, through your community of founders, if you've seen, key similarities across these different domains, or if there's key differences between EdTech companies, approaches, innovations in the K12 or in the higher ed space.
Yeah, there's more similarities than differences, I would say. Some of the things that, if you boil down the problems, right? One is that your user is not typically your buyer. Procurement is slow and cumbersome. Funding is scarce. Sales cycles are generally long. You couldn't tell me which industry I'm talking about. I mean, it's both K12 and higher ed, right? And I'll take it one step further. That's not just here. That's worldwide, right? And so this is a fundamental problem as we build up education technology ecosystems everywhere. Is we need to be focused on not just solving these problems or sort of making them easier, but making them easier or trying to influence them to work in a way that leads to more equitable learning outcomes. Because one of the things that is happening right now is, as capitalism will, right? We this system is being influenced a lot, which is right and fine in the way things are, by the companies that make the most money, right? The companies that make the most money have the best shot at success, have the best shot of adoption, grow the quickest. And that's the way it's working. And honestly, we need VC money in any sort of tech industry to make it work, but it is the dominant force right now. And so we need to create additional forces, like Project Found Ed aims to do, to help add more information into the ecosystem, to help everybody make better choices, so that it's not the companies that make the most money that are the most successful, but that the most impactful companies in education technology are the ones that make the most money, right? That's the sort of shift that we'd like to sort of help bring about.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes to your, I think kind of like your tagline that you have is like keeping the impact at the heart of innovation, and kind of goes to this idea of ensuring that we're promoting and rewarding impactful companies rather than pure profit revenue for the companies. So I know this is probably, a little bit of an obvious question, but, what, aside from, wanting to improve student outcomes, how else should we differentiate EdTech from more of the mainstream Silicon Valley EdTech space? Because, right now with funders and things, EdTech is kind of seen as like a subset of the broader Silicon Valley tech space. So like how, what does that look like if we kind of remove it or make it, a very distinct and separate area from EdTech? How can we go about doing that? Does it start with the funders, or, what are the starting points?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it starts with the funders, but we have a few things going for us, right? One is that we mentioned it as a difficulty before, that we can count on one hand the exclusive EdTech investors that exist in the space. But it is an advantage that we know who is in EdTech, right? Like who is here investing in K12, higher ed, lifelong learning, early childhood. We know who it is. And so that's an advantage because we typically get together at these conferences, and we all got together in San Diego just recently. Like, we know who they are from a funder perspective. One of the things that I think really needs to happen, it relates to this relationship between EdTech companies and educators generally, and then somewhat to administrators. This problem of educators and administrators looking at technology like a monolith is a huge barrier. And so we're starting to think about what it looks like for Project Found Ed to reach out to educators and highlight a very real fact, right? Which is that entrepreneurs in EdTech generally could be anyone, right? For the most part, they are teachers, students, parents, educators of any sort, administrators. These are not market opportunists, serial entrepreneurs most of the time. They're people with lived experience in education solving a problem that they live themselves. So these are folks essentially that are trying to solve problems in the classroom and are doing a good job of doing it, but they're not finding their educators. So we're seeing administrators and educators looking at EdTech like, oh, these vendors, they won't leave me alone. It's so annoying. But eventually they cave and say, okay, well, this is necessary. Let's go get it. But what's really happening is that we've got educators over here creating technology that is solving problems that they live in the classroom, and not connecting to these other educators that are over here saying, I've got these problems, but oh, they're so annoying. It's like, no, we're the same people. We're all trying to get at education outcomes, equitable education outcomes for learners, and we're just not talking. We're not talking effectively. The relationship is broken down. It's being essentially mediated by funders who are picking those that will win and sort of helping them build up sales teams and build up marketing campaigns that are the main sort of connection point to those educators and administrators, and it's really damaged the relationship. So we're going to start to try and take our community of EdTech founders and do a better job of connecting directly to educators in a more authentic way, because I think it needs to happen.
I think one of the big last questions we were really interested in is, are there you have a huge community of EdTech founders that you're working with. What are some of your kind of favorite products that you've seen kind of I know like the social emotional learning space is a really big space. So do you have any key big products that you think are really driving kind of that model of impact that you think everyone should know about?
I can't pick favorites. That's not cool. I just going off of what you just said. I am very interested and heartened by the fact that social emotional learning generally has taken off as a validated a new category of spending for education technology and education generally. I think it's been a long time needed, especially after this past year and a half, and people are spending on it, and I'm glad, and it will continue to grow, and I hope it does. That being said, like you're already seeing a whole bunch of folks claiming SEL outcomes where there just aren't any, right? You know, I make curriculum in math, but I added, you know, wording here and there to, you know, talk about feelings or make it fully representational, and now I'm all of a sudden SEL. That's not SEL, right? That is just it's the same curriculum with different wording, and so I think that SEL has a lot of maturing to do right now. There's just one major body that is certifying standards-based stuff for SEL. That's CASEL, and they're great, but they only certify every other year, and it costs multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. And so there is, you know, this is another sort of barrier to innovation in EdTech generally, is that there are these middlemen or middle people that are keeping folks from I don't know, being anointed as an official SEL product. And so we need more. We need just more. We need more folks to be working on efficacy generally.
Again, I'm kind of struck by the power of and the implications of what we just talked about. Because as we think about the main players, whether it be funders, EdTech companies, the institutions, or the students themselves, they each have a relative impact on where the education landscape ends up moving towards and what we innovate on and what we invest on. And increasingly, there has been this growing recognition of these non-cognitive skills domains as being critical, valuable, especially in the times of remote learning where self-regulated learning strategies were a little bit more dependent and determinant of how students succeeded. And I can't help but come back again to the earlier topic of equity and understanding how it is and who it is that can play a role in ensuring equitable access to these essential and more pioneering areas of learning and resources and essential EdTech tools. We know from our work working with institutions that equity consistently ranks as one of the top priorities that schools are committed to investing into. And so given two options, two companies that I can invest in, if one, it has a demonstrated a track record of increasing equity and these new domains of need, then chances are that's where the investment will go. But to your point, how is it that we can effectively and responsibly validate that these are dimensions that are being thoughtfully created, and then how is it that we can convey that to the EdTech companies themselves in terms of what the institution's priorities actually are? Because when you do ask them, they do say, yes, we want to be innovative, we want to invest in these domains, and we want equity at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, let me first push back a little bit on something you said, which is that if given two options and one shows better equitable outcomes, it's the one that institution will go with. I don't see that always being the case, honestly. And in fact, I would say it's usually not, right? Most of the time when purchasing decisions are made on lots of factors, but mostly, you know, I'm not going to say convenience, but just like I've heard of it, I've heard other people use it, and then I know it works, right? I'll talk about. Oh, yeah, it's almost at the end here. I'm happy to take questions, but I will talk about probably my most controversial opinion, which is that I think we worry too much, administrators in particular, and funders especially. We worry too much about efficacy in education technology. We talk about it all the time. And efficacy is super important, right? We never want to put something in front of a kid that we don't think is going to work. That's absolutely true. Also, there are 500,000 things that happen in classrooms and lecture halls every day that we have no idea if they work or not. And we do that because we trust our educators to make the right decisions about what it is that they're going to do in that classroom. We are not asking them to prove to us on a daily or annual basis how efficacious their, I don't know, the exit tickets that they wrote for this semester are, right? Why we've decided to put that in onus almost entirely on EdTech lately, I am not sure, right? Now, I am not advocating for products that are not efficacious, like we should always do that, but I am advocating for us to continue to trust our educators to make good decisions about what works and what doesn't. And so what we've been seeing a lot of is that purchasing decisions and funding decisions generally are being held up by companies not being able to prove the true efficacy of their product with a randomized control trial. Imagine if an educator had to do a randomized control trial on, I don't know what, their quilt making project that they're doing in the second grade. It would never happen. Nothing would ever happen. And so a lot of what we're doing is holding our own industry back by deciding that it needs to be the most efficacious thing out there before we decide to adopt it.
If you were to translate that into some sort of advice for institutions, what would that be in a sentence or two?
Oh, in a sentence or two for institutions, if you know the category in which you're spending, there is not, like, let's say you need to do a better job of recruitment, right? If you're an institution, you have to do better matching of applicants to whatever. There are places that you can go. There are people that you can talk about like what is out there that isn't just the big people that you know. There's so much stuff out there that can work better for you. And you just need to invest a little bit more time into understanding what's out there, because I promise you there's a solution for you out there. One of the things that we do not have a shortage of is EdTech solutions. Most of them are great, but a few of them are the ones that sell to everyone. And that's the sort of what we have to change, right? We have to sort of like level the playing field. Right now, we have this huge power shift from like the big sort of education publishers of the past to the big education technology providers of the present. And we just shouldn't have that. Like, it's a huge power imbalance that we need to flatten. And so there's an EdTech solution for you out there, and it's not that hard to research them. And I'd be happy to help if you need help.
Kind of on a related note, shifting to a couple of the audience questions that have come in. So you were mentioning, kind of that focus on equity for students. So Susie was wondering, what are the areas that you see as key for access or for equity that go beyond just the access of the technology itself? So more of that equity of experience, for example, in like blended learning environments. How do you make that equal for students that are remote versus in person? So do you have any thoughts on just beyond the physical access to technology?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of thoughts, right? I think that access is so important, and we're getting so much closer. It's not perfect, but we're getting closer and closer to getting more people reliable access to technology. But so there are some things around the fringes there that you can do, like, make sure all content is downloadable, make sure stuff can get saved locally and not only submitted through a connection. There are feature sets that you can create in your application to make it easier for folks that don't have a reliable connection at home but might have access to devices, which most homes do have access to devices, but not necessarily that stuff. But then there's also other stuff that have larger, broader implications on equity. Things like, we're seeing backlash. We're seeing a moving away from things like the SAT and the ACT, because there's a lot of things in tests and standardized tests like that I think are necessary. We'll be testing forever, right? We need some way of measuring how we're doing. But specifically, those tests are being turned away because they measure something, but it might only measure something for specific populations of people that have access to particular kinds of resources as they're being brought up in the education ecosystem. And so the sort of broader equity implications are, how do we create tests that are focused on measuring skills that directly relate to specific careers or jobs that are out there, just much more alignment to career outcomes rather than, academic outcomes that it turns out, aren't great predictors for success, especially for those that whose major problem is poverty and not necessarily education.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And one of the other questions from Maria, and that showed up in the chat, and this is more of a specific question for companies who are targeting younger populations of students. I'm thinking broadly about some of the restrictions and the guidelines in terms of companies accessing students and getting input and insights from those populations. So things like privacy laws and limits to access certain students or student populations. Are there general patterns, general barriers, general strategies that companies who are looking to penetrate that market space need to be aware of?
Yes and no. Okay, so there's a couple of organizations that do a really good job on this. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with this topic, you're dealing with federal and state level regulations. Like, you just have to sort of understand them and know them before you do anything. So folks that do a good job here are the Future of Privacy Forum. They have all sorts of resources for EdTech founders looking to understand COPPA laws and privacy laws generally for kids. The other thing that I will say is that, unfortunately, this is not the advice that I can give is to do what everybody else is doing, which is an unfortunate solution, which is that if you're implementing Google Classroom and Clever Single Sign-On, you don't really have to deal with it, unless you're choosing to then store massive amounts of data on your student. Apart from that, then you'll get yourself into trouble. But they've taken the onus off of the entrepreneur and taken it on themselves, which I think is a major problem, but it is a solution.
So one last question, and then we'll have to close it up. As I mentioned, unfortunately, time is always too short for these discussions. Given the current climate, and imagine if I was a young company, should I invest in creating a new product and introducing to the world at this time, or is there just too much uncertainty?
Yes, always yes.
Okay.
And sort of go into it with eyes wide open. Don't try and find investment first. Introduce yourself to all the investors, talk to them about their ideas, send out quarterly updates. But don't pitch them constantly. Don't feel like the success of your company hinges on whether or not you'll receive an investment. I'll tell you right now, apart from friends and family and any sort of local sort of startup incentive programs that might exist in your area, you will not be invested in until you start making money. And so if you are an organization, focus on that. What's your MVP for the problem that you're solving? Start selling it. And as you build revenue and refine your product, the investors will be there. But don't focus on the investment. And that's one of the other key differences of our market is that, when you fundraise, is totally flip-flop. You have to do the hustle at the beginning to build revenues before you can fundraise.
Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence and the views. I would encourage anyone who maybe is contemplating starting their own company to reach out to Found Ed. Where can people find out more about what you all are doing and engage with you?
Yeah, at our website, projectfounded.org. You can sign up for the community there. And then we also have started pushing out some resources that are specific to EdTech founders that, we found there's not a lot out there. So we just published our investor list. So anybody that's ever invested in EdTech is on this list. You can take a look. And we do a bunch of webinars as well on topics specifically for EdTech founders. And we've recorded them all and have them available on our site there too. So get signed up at projectfounded.org.
Great. Well, I am thrilled and incredibly grateful again for your time, your contributions, just being part of this conversation today. If anyone wants to learn more about Project Found Ed, we posted the URL in the chat. Again, feel free to reach out to Sandro and their team. And to find out more about the Learning Lab speaker series or to get involved with some of the ongoing projects that we have at WG Labs, I'd also recommend that you reach out to WG Labs and on any of our social platforms with a tag at WG Labs or through our website, wglabs.org/CIN. But with that, I do need to sort of close it off and give people time back in their day. I appreciate you all being here and being part of this growing community of conversation around ideas with potential impact. So with that, we'll close it off. And again, thank you, Sandro, for your time today.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Sandro.